If you suddenly received a large sum of money, say you like won the lottery or you had a relative who, left you a big inheritance, you might not know what to do with it, how to manage it. That is not specifically the reason why we're talking about this, but the essence of the question is the same. Prosper Canada has created something called a lump sum toolkit. And the reason they did that is there is a significant settlement in First Nations communities that is going to be a game changer for a lot of First Nations communities. It is called the First Nations Child and Family Services and Jordan's Principle Settlement. And we're going to talk to Prosper Canada about the toolkit they have developed. Our guest is Carrie Wong. She is the Learning and Training Senior Manager with Prosper, and she joins us from Markham, Ontario. Hello there.
Hello, Bruce. It's great to be talking to you.
If you're not paying attention to the headlines every single day, you might not be aware of this settlement. It's got a very, very long name, but in effect, what is it? What does it mean?
Yes, so in 2023, the Federal Court of Canada approved the settlement agreement to compensate First Nations children and families who experienced discrimination because of Canada's underfunding of the First Nations Child and Family Services Program and their narrow application of the Jordan's Principle. So this settlement agreement, which totals over $23 billion, is estimated to provide compensation to more than 300,000 First Nations children, youth, and families. And the claims process will open in March. And although we don't know the exact timeline of when the settlement payments will be made, we know that there is a gap in the supports available to these recipients to navigate the receipt of these payments.
I can't do that mental math very effectively. The billions of dollars and the hundreds of thousands of people, what is the range of dollars that an individual might receive?
Yes, it's estimated that recipients will receive about $40,000 as a lump sum payment.
Right. So for any of us, think about all of a sudden $40,000 popping into your bank account. That creates both opportunities and challenges. Tell us more about what you were trying to do in the design of this toolkit.
Yes, so we know that the compensation process itself is very difficult for many survivors. Not only are these settlements potentially triggering and traumatic to individuals and communities, particularly because they've experienced harm through the program, and they also come with a lot of other complex challenges that have financial implications. So, for example, some of these recipients may not have systems in place like a bank account to deposit the payment, and many don't have a financial plan for managing the money once it's received. They may be experiencing pressure from family and friends for money, and encroachment from financial predators. So the latter point is what we're focusing on in terms of design and development of these resources. We will be developing a tailored resource specific for Indigenous recipients and supporting them through this process. We're expecting that to launch in May, but in the meantime, we've curated some relevant resources into a toolkit.
It's really helpful, and I'm glad you addressed some of the context here, because for those people who, grew up, you were born in Canada, you grew up in Canada, you lived in a town with an ATM at the end of your block, you went to a regular school, like there's so much about the Indigenous experience that is unlike anything that other people would have seen. And those are really relevant attributes, including the distrust that can be present for Indigenous communities around institutions because of all the harms that have been done by, the banks and the Hudson's Bay Company and all those sorts of things. There are 4 components to your toolkit. The first is Indigenous financial education. What would you say is similar to and different from financial education that you might just, generically send to anybody?
So with Indigenous financial education, there are a few key topics that we want to make sure are particularly culturally relevant for Indigenous audiences, primarily around things such as saving and investing and the idea of growth of wealth, where in Indigenous worldviews, it's very important that support to the community is kind of considered as a part of saving and wealth building. And also the idea that the access to different types of financial products, as you've mentioned. So first, maybe there may be a gap in the level of knowledge around core investment products and investment services and financial services. As you've mentioned, a distrust of financial institutions. So as an example, one of the things that we've heard through our conversations with people with lived experience is that they may go into a financial institution and the bank tellers, the first thing they would do is congratulating them on the amount of money that they've received, but actually that sum of money comes with a lot of emotional baggage.
It's not a bonus from work or something
Exactly.
like that. Yeah. You also highlight a bunch of different resources. What are some of the resources that you highlight?
Yes, so we have some resources that address the unique nature of receiving a large sum of money suddenly. So a lot of the time, there's a lot of confusion and a lot of overwhelm about what to do with the money. Sometimes there's a sense of wanting to just use it as quickly as possible without considering that there may be opportunities to allocate the money towards different uses. So saving is one that we've talked about, sharing back to the community, paying off debt. There's also potentially more predation from fraudsters and scammers during this period, where sometimes they come when they hear the community is about to be receiving a settlement payment and then would provide lots of different goods and services without being kind of transparent about the long-term costs of said products and services.
I want to dig into this one a little bit. It's component number 3 for your toolkit, frauds and scams. And, generically, it's like, oh, the phone call from CRA or, the phishing schemes or whatever. What are the ones that are most relevant for Indigenous communities? Are you talking about someone who might actually show up on reserve and, try and scam people in person?
Yes, like one example is someone coming in to sell hot tubs to a community on reserve, and or asking them to purchase a new truck that the individual may not need. So large item purchases, and then different types of services that, such as insurance brokers coming in, where obviously there would be some services that may be beneficial to the individual, but there's a lack of understanding of what the
Right.
long-term costs would
So
be.
a huge gray area here, because on the one
Yes.
end of the continuum is like actual fraud and scams like the Nigerian prince. And then the other end of the continuum are goods and services that, are legal to sell, but may be irresponsible to sell given the context of the settlement and the community in which that person lives and what they're aspiring to have in their life.
Yes, that's exactly it.
That's very interesting. Okay. You also really underscore and kind of wrap all of this around the idea of financial wellness for Indigenous communities. What does that look like?
Yes, I think financial wellness, we are learning ourselves to think about it more from a holistic perspective. So not only does it encompass sort of like the financial implications and financial components, but also the mental well-being, the giving back to the community, the emotional health aspects, particularly when we're talking about the topic of settlement payments. And so integrating mental wellness supports, integrating spiritual supports, letting people know where they can find additional guidance and find relevant and accurate information, and making people feel like they are in control and have decision-making ability around their finances and making them feel empowered about their
Mm.
decisions.
I can very clearly see the primary audience for the toolkit, but I can also see an enormous secondary audience for service providers, for bank tellers, for other people who would be connected to recipients of this settlement. What would you tell that secondary audience in terms of how they can access the toolkit and engage with the kind of insight that you're providing?
Yes, that's exactly it, that we see the resources here being relevant for both people who may be coming into large sum money themselves or those who will be supporting people or interacting with people who may be coming to lump sum payments. So we will be producing some resources that will also consider like a facilitator perspective. So people may use these resources to conduct workshops, provide one-on-one financial help services, understanding the ramifications of settlement payments, and then also supporting people in developing financial plans, thinking through different types of long-term goals, and then just increasing their awareness and their knowledge around consumer protection.
Where do they find the toolkit?
Yes, so they can find the toolkit on our Prosper Canada Learning Hub website. So that is learninghub.prospercanada.org. And on the front page, there is a link to the Guiding Your Journey toolkit. Just click on the link and you'll have access to all of the different resources that are curated.
Really interesting stuff. Carrie, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much. And I'd like to encourage listeners to take a look at the resources. On the same webpage, we have lots of other resources such as training for our service providers, including one that's available right now for free on income and taxes. And we're hopeful that these types of resources will be really helpful in driving our mission to support different types of communities, particularly First Nations communities and different Indigenous and non-Indigenous organizations to build their financial wellness. Thank you.
Thank you, Carrie. Carrie Wong is with Prosper Canada, and she was here to talk about a lump sum payment toolkit that's going to be relevant in Indigenous communities in the months and years to come as that settlement gets dispersed.